think we are rolling. And you can hear me fine and everything?
Yes.
Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in and welcome to the show. Today I have a very special guest, Dr. Shoshana Jacobs.
Hi.
Would you like to introduce yourself, where you study, what you do? Just a quick little...
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Shoshana Jacobs. I am currently working and thinking and being at the University of Guelph in the Department of Integrative Biology. I fairly recently became an associate professor, so yay, tenure. Before that, I was doing some different things, lots of different types of jobs before settling into an academic life. Certainly it resonates with me as a way to finish my career. So I think this is where I'm going to stay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you're at Guelph now, so just down the street.
Yeah.
And you're doing biology. And as I was going through some of your work, it seems like seabirds, yes?
Seabirds, yeah.
Okay, has it always been seabirds or?
No. So a long time ago, somebody told me that there are two types of researchers. There are researchers, especially within the domain of biology, but I think that this kind of framework might resonate outside of the discipline, that there are those who specialize in a certain species or a certain habitat or a certain region. And then there are those that specialize in methods and can apply them to different scenarios or different species, regions, or habitats. So I thought that it would be fun to be able to travel and go to different places. My brain tends to not be able to focus too much on the same thing for very long, though I am very grateful that there are people in the world that can do that. That's not me. So I specialized in methods. Originally I was working on marine mammals and harbor seals for the beginnings of my academic career, and quickly realized that if I was going to transfer that over to my PhD, it would be more difficult because marine mammals are notoriously unpredictable in their distribution, and I wanted to make sure that I would get a PhD when I was done. So I switched to birds because of the relative ease. I'm not saying it's easy, but the relative ease with which it is to study them.
Okay, is that like a migratory pattern thing? Like, are they more predictable in that sense, or?
Yeah, so they're more predictable in many senses, but you're right. Migration and sort of the traditional routes that they have established definitely allows us to more accurately sort of predict where they're going to be or where they're going. The other thing, though, for me that was important about seabirds specifically, and not necessarily then applicable to all birds, is that seabirds come back to the exact same spot to breed every single year. Not only like within a few centimeters, like exactly where they were
Wow.
the year before, for, potentially 10, 15, 20, up to 60 years. So I loved that predictability. It made being able to think about my methods and the skills that I had a little bit easier to apply to a scenario that was, more predictable.
Okay, so before I ask you about the methods in particular, can I quickly ask about how do they find such micro? Is this like they leave a little trail behind? They
Yeah, and so this is a fairly sort of classic question, right? How do they find exactly? How do they know exactly where they need to go back every single year? The only answer that I've been able to come up with is the same way that I know where my house is in the city. And I don't know if that makes sense, but to me, it makes sense, right? That I have the ability to understand where my body is in space, and to visualize where my house is and what that looks like, and to visualize the road to get there. That's as far as I've gotten. It's not my
Okay.
area of expertise, but that's kind of, for me, that satisfies me as kind of like a way where you're right. Like ants leave chemical trails to follow, but that may not be, that may be sort of within their wheelhouse of resources that they have. Seabirds have quite a cognitive life. And so for me, it isn't difficult to imagine that they do it pretty much the same way we do.
Okay, sort of triangulating based
Yeah,
on, like, I live across from the Big B, which is down the street from the...
exactly.
Okay, cool. That's a cool way to think about it.
Although lately our commutes to work have been a lot shorter. So maybe we'll forget where we need to go.
I'm hoping that I just never have to go back. I'm very happy right here. This is very nice for me.
It's pretty comfortable, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we'll see how that changes in the next week or two. Okay, so you said that you're more of a methods person. So
Yeah.
what does that entail? So I come from a physics background, so I have no idea what biological methods or ecology methods look like. So
Sure. So originally I started looking at population dynamics. So how populations changed over time and what some of the variables would be that influence that. So the classic one that we all kind of think about is human interactions, human presence, and sort of human occupation of different habitats and how that might change other populations' ability to live within that habitat. So that's how it kind of started. PhD, I realized that some of the methods were good, were applicable, but that I would have to learn some new ones. And so then I started kind of collecting a toolkit of different methods that would allow me to understand like the larger picture of how populations are influenced by external factors. By fishing practices, by economic fishing practices, for example, or large scale events like global climate change. And what I learned is that toolkit becomes very powerful the more diverse it becomes in disciplinary methods. So we bring in all sorts of different tools from different disciplines to be able to kind of hone in on answering sort of big questions about how things change over time.
okay, so does that that sounds like it opens you up to a lot of collaborations with other groups. You get to meet a lot of different people and
Yep.
pick their brains.
Yeah.
That sounds really cool. Can you...
It's so fun. And it definitely has been a theme of my research resilience within, my fairly short career. I guess now I'm considered to be mid-career, but so the more collaborative, the more sort of transdisciplinary, first of all, the better the research, for sure, but also the more protected you are from any kind of disruption, which is why I don't only do research in seabirds. In fact, research in seabirds, the seabird world, the community is fairly small. And, you kind of, once you find a spot that you want to occupy, it's not always easy to get into those spots that are already occupied. And so, you either have to develop your own thing or you have to find, ways of collaborating. And depending upon the area, sometimes it's a little bit hard to be accepted, for new people to come in. So my research program now is extremely transdisciplinary in order to create that resilience in my research program. So I fill out a whole bunch of grants, I send out a whole bunch of invitations to collaborate, and then I see what I get back. And and if you send out a lot of them, then you get some that are able to then direct where you go in the future. And that's kind of my approach right now to developing my research program.
Interesting. I always think with people who are in the biological sciences that the way that the story sort of comes out of their research, it seems almost like they have like an overarching mission. Like, I want to solve this problem. I want to figure this out. But it sounds like you're much more an exploratory person.
Yeah, and like the problem is that I get really excited about different projects. And it may come off as a little bit of arrogance too, thinking that you can work on anything. But what I find is that I can learn anything. And the other benefit, and I would like to say that I did this deliberately, but I'm not sure that I did. The benefit is the diversity of collaborators and students that I get to be connected with. We're talking about students from all ages, disciplines, geographic regions and experiences, mature students and younger students that are coming in, students with kids, and like my lab is incredibly diverse. And then because of that, even the research is better when, I have a student that I supervise who's in the Department of Management. And I happen to be an adjunct professor in the Department of Management because of that student. Talking with my student who's doing a study on spider physiology, you should hear what comes out of that conversation. It's wonderful and sometimes just funny, but it has created for me a richness, an intellectual richness that makes me happy to go into work.
That's cool.
Yeah,
so,
I like. There are some challenges to it.
Uh-huh.
There are members of the community that don't recognize the value of that as much, and it's okay because there's a huge culture shift going on in academia that gets me very excited, and so I definitely defer and thank the pioneers that have allowed for me to be able to live a fairly, sheltered research career where, still sometimes people don't get it. And so you don't get that grant or whatever, but there are, funding agencies that do recognize the need for this type of thing. Even in the traditional funding agencies now, there are non-traditional grants that support this type of work. So
that's great. You mentioned it might come off as arrogant or something that you can do all of these things. It really sounds like you're not saying that you can do everything that everybody can do, but it seems like you have a really a good talent in getting the right people into the right places, finding what they're good at, and sort of funneling or directing them in those directions. Maybe that's a nice way to put it.
Thank you. I've worked hard for that. So before I came to academia, I was in a bit of a non-traditional employment situation where I was an Arctic and Antarctic expedition leader. And I would travel with all sorts of groups, worrying about them like some kind of like mother hen, don't die on me kind of thing, right? But working with a diverse group of people with very different motivations and needs allowed me to be able to recognize that the best way to get through a situation, especially in the context of safety, was to mobilize everyone's individual asset. And so, for me, the more the people in the room look like me, the less excited I get, because then it's just like, well, okay, we're just one person in the room. But having this, true collaboration where everybody brings something different is for me the ultimate way to succeed in anything. And the metric that we use in order to determine success for me is not, the individual success of that project, but whether or not they invite you back to the table. And if they do, if you become a usual suspect, then you've achieved your goal.
That makes sense. If if you get to keep doing what you want to do, then you're succeeding. It's more of like a less of a results-oriented approach, more of a process thing.
It's a process, exactly. Always thinking about the next connection, right? The next thing, and how am I going to help inspire the next great, project that's going to come from this? Recognizing that there's no way that you're going to be able to accomplish it alone. So you better have people that like working with you, right?
That's
It's kind of
cool.
simple. And it goes against some of the traditional ways that we evaluate success within our disciplines. And all of that is changing. So by the time, the people that are starting their graduate careers now, by the time they get ready to think about where it is that they're going to go, I'm quite excited about the landscape and how it's going to be different.
Yeah, that's interesting. Would it be fair to say that you really value the mentorship aspect of your job more? I'm not going to say more than the research output, but
Yeah, I love the mentorship, and I recognize, because of my mentors, um, who have demonstrated to me the need to not only be a mentor but to be an advocate. And so now when I think about mentorship, I think about advocacy. How am I going to be able to leverage my privilege and my power to bring people along with me? So instead, mentorship I find is more about like, oh, just listen, I'll tell you my life and you'll figure out what the advice is. Advocacy is actively going out and making those connections and introductions and saying, you should supervise this student, who's going to be graduating from my lab really soon, or you should take the student for this job opportunity, and that kind of deal. And I spend a lot of time doing that because other people have spent a lot of time, and if they see this, they will be laughing, going, "Yep, a lot of time doing it for me." And it's important to make sure that we pass on that ability if we're able to. And I think that that's important. I think when people from equity seeking communities achieve a certain level beyond what is, sort of allowed, usually, they should be given a choice as whether or not they're going to serve as an advocate, or whether they're really just going to do what they plan to do and need to do. And either strategy is fine. I just feel really good being an advocate.
yeah. That it sounds like you're almost blend. So in my mind, I see like as a professor, there's sort of like two streams that you have to work in. There's the teaching stream, and then there's the research stream. And maybe traditionally those didn't really meet so much. It almost seemed like those were two separate jobs.
Yeah.
But the sense I'm getting from talking to you is that there's a lot more in common between those than, at least for you, than.
There can be, absolutely, and sort of more directly for me, because 1/3 of my research program is in STEM education and post-secondary education. So I do actually, collect data with my class and on my class if they give me permission. And so for me, the leap is sort of more obvious, and has challenged me to think about sort of more creatively within biology research, how we can go about leveraging the power of students and education. So yeah, to me, it's all great. And to me, there's like so many questions that are going to, keep me and my students occupied for the rest of our careers.
That's perfect.
Yeah. But, like mixing up these lines allows me to consistently up my game in teaching. It makes me want to learn how to be a better teacher, and sort of figuring out how to sell those achievements or those contributions to a more traditional framework for evaluation has been a challenge, but ultimately it's fine, it's possible. You just have to develop a few little skills about how to do it, what language to use, and then it's a no-brainer.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe this transitions kind of nicely into the next phase that we sort of discussed. But something that I've kind of noticed from getting closer to people who teach in university settings and like helping with being a teaching assistant and head TAing stuff, it seems like there's like a very standard way of going about teaching. There's like the lecture situation. It's when people tend to get new courses, or when they're handed a course, it's very much like what was going on before. I'm not going to really change too much and keep going along the same path.
Yeah.
But these days, it seems like we kind of have to alter that a lot. So maybe the more ambitious people who take on courses were sort of forced to do more traditional type courses and couldn't really innovate so much. And now it seems like everybody's being forced to innovate. Can you maybe talk a little bit about your approach to, I guess most of this is going to be distance studies stuff.
Yeah. And oh my gosh, it has been the last couple of months have challenged me to think about, you know, this dramatic change in student experience of learning, and what my original goals for those, what the student experience was, how to create it in not just one classroom anymore, but now literally 900 different classrooms, right? We started out with 900 students in a first year biology class, and now they are in different time zones, in different, you know, contexts, and all of this stuff caused me to really think about what remote learning is, and how it can be accessible, what the barriers are, and what my priorities were, and my sort of social contract to my students too, in terms of my obligations. I tell you, these last couple of months, I've learned more about teaching than I ever have. You're right about, like, the initial sort of design of the course mattered in how it then got translated to a remote learning environment. And I would love to study that, but like, it's too soon. We're going to wait.
Yeah.
But one of my questions is, how did the course design influence what happened after all of our university classrooms got shut down? And I think my course experience, my course was pretty resilient. You know, for example, you know, we had already evaluated most of the students. I think we had them up to about 65 to 70% of the course had already been graded, right? Okay. Whereas a more traditional course, they might only have done that 30% midterm, right? Or that kind of deal. So there were all sorts of ways that the course that I teach kind of made it through with less of a problem than other ones might have. Certainly our labs were disrupted and all of that, but it was pretty easy for us to be able to take what we were doing and put it into a remote format. Your observation, though, about how more non-traditional courses may have had to become more traditional in their sort of lecture style when done remotely is absolutely accurate. There was a lot less of I couldn't reach out and say, what do you think, right, to the screen, because they couldn't see where I was pointing, you know, that kind of deal, right? So yeah, exactly. So it really challenged us to find ways of being interactive with our students, at least to some degree. And we did that through chats and through, you know, online polling systems and all of those things to try at least to connect. But what we realized was that we switched platforms because, you know, one platform totally crashed on us and another one totally didn't serve us. What we realized is that it doesn't matter what platform you use. It doesn't matter what polling technology, the technology itself, right? The trademark technology didn't matter. It was the ability to teach from a point of empathy, of understanding. And this is something that ties into my ability to work on collaborative teams. If you understand who your audience is, who your person is, and you behave in a way that demonstrates respect for that person and where they're coming from, then you're going to get through. It's going to be fine, right? Frequent communication, you need to communicate way more when you're teaching remotely than when you are face-to-face. You have to communicate not only more, you have to communicate more on a human level, on a personal level, right? So we talked about what was going on with our pets and our kids and our life at home and just little snippets, right? Obviously not like a TMI overload, but like just ways of communicating in a way that replaces that loss of community right? And doesn't just throw the instruction. By being face to face, we were a community in that room for, for 50 minutes, a few times a week, and we lost that. And technology doesn't replace that. It's the content and the voices that you use through the technology that bring that up again. And I think one of the big lessons in that is to be able to identify what those are and figure out how to deliver it through a piece of technology.
Right. So I guess what I was imagining we were going to talk about was, what are the solutions that you found for making these online courses happen, and like, I don't know, like, what is the URL for the solution to all of this stuff? But it
all of the problems.
Yeah, or like what did you build from the ground up that solved all of the problems? But it really just sounds like the fix is just listening and talking to your students and assessing their needs on a...
Yes. And because we had to do it so quickly, we definitely benefited from the understanding that we needed to do those things. Like we know who our students are, at least on a sort of generalized model, right? We know that they have diverse needs, they have diverse abilities to access certain ways of understanding what we're saying and all of those things. And so the technology thread was clunky and embarrassing. We called it the inception of teaching, because we had Zoom rooms inside Zoom rooms, right? Just to be able to provide access to all of our 900 students. But we also had to have, for example, like just in terms of the specifics, we also had to have closed captioning going on live, so that our students who are hearing impaired can join us and experience that community building that we were working on live. Otherwise, it wouldn't have worked for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have closed captioning. In order to do that, you have to then tag it on to this program and buy this license and do all of those things, right? But coming at it not with the technology toolkit, but with I need to serve this audience with these different needs, makes it pretty easy to figure out what technology you're going to string along.
I like the way that you phrase that. It's kind of refreshing to hear it. It's almost like the university is like a business that's serving customers. Like, you have to address the customer's need and provide them with the product that they actually want to pay for.
Yeah,
and that's maybe a little bit different than what you normally hear of, like, students have to come to my class and they have to absorb.
Well, they have to be able to engage, right? The business model falls down if you use, if you use profit as motivation, right? For me, instead of profit, it's number of students engaged, right? That's my payoff, right? That's my bottom line. So then the business model is perfect as an analogy, because, how am I going to be able to make sure that all students are engaged? And one of the things that I've learned about this is that by demonstrating that engaging all students is a priority, you have students who don't necessarily need access to whatever, closed captioning, for example, coming up and saying, I respect and I like that you did that, right? I see that you did that. Even though I don't need it, I value the priority or the need for it. And I think then you become, you model then sort of this air of being inclusive and recognizing that, that there are these diverse needs and wants and preferences and all of that. Sometimes I fail miserably, right? Because we are such a population. There's so many different people in the room, right? And as it gets bigger and bigger from the groups that I was leading in Antarctica, where there were 20 people, now we're going up to 900 or 1,200 in terms of class size. And so I'm constantly being corrected. I'm constantly being exposed to different things. And what has saved me so far is my willingness to learn and to adapt and to try new things and to see if it works, rather than just having this kind of closed mindset. No, this is the tool that I use. This is how I use it, kind of, that kind of deal.
Such a scientific way of thinking about it.
I hope so.
But yeah, that's a really exciting thing that I'm personally excited for. I recently looked into how conferences had been changing and wrote a little thing about that, and was
What did
very
you find?
well. I was mostly excited about the idea that we could sort of build up conferences again from the ground up with accessibility in mind. And then I started thinking, well, in looking at your work and stuff, started thinking about how this could be translated to how the classroom is rebuilt with accessibility in mind. Because I think a lot of the solutions had been sort of ad hoc, like Band-Aid solutions, and then because of that, not a lot of the things incorporated with each other very well. They didn't really mesh so well. So this first iteration of maybe summer courses, I think things might end up being a bit clunky, but what do you think is going to happen going forward? Do you think there's going to be like a new push to have like a more accessibility resources that fit together, or how do you think that's going to turn out?
I don't know. I think that some of us will use this as an opportunity to redesign. I loved your ground up kind of redesign of a conference. Let's just start again rather than creating these clunky retrofit pieces around the edge. And then there will be some that won't, and we'll just have to wait for them to retire. But certainly it is an opportunity. Opportunity or taking advantage of opportunity requires resourcing. And right now in this, on May 8th, I'm not seeing the resourcing that's going to need to come in order for us to be able to seize the opportunity. I am still optimistic, and I hope that higher education across Canada does provide the resourcing necessary. I do see it as a good investment, an investment in the future of enrollments and participation and inclusivity. And I'd like to think that they're going to come around. So I'm ready. I'm ready to seize the resources to do it. And hopefully it'll happen at a large scale. If not, it'll happen at a smaller scale to some of us. And that may be just enough to get students to stick with us and to go through it. I'm just not sure. I worry a lot. I worry that the fall is going to cause many students, especially from equity-seeking communities, to be forced to take a gap year or to choose to take a gap year. So I worry that an unrepresentative sample of the population is going to be able to move through first year while others have to wait. And then I worry about in the fall 2021 whether there's going to be a double cohort effect in a way that causes further marginalization of students. And so I worry a lot. I'm very stressed about what is happening. I'm also very this is where my arrogance comes back, I think. I'm also very stressed about my lack of power to be able to help in understanding that what's happening now requires a systems approach to coming up with a solution. It requires a long-term solution because we are talking about students' education, and education has huge consequences in students' lives. And graduate students in particular have been left out of the conversation when it comes to planning and comes to helping them through. So it's been frustrating because my sphere of power is really with these 900 students in my class, and that pisses me off. That makes me angry because I have things that I want to say. I want to help do an audience analysis of the true sphere of influence that what we're going through now has had, to help others bring their talents to the table to come up with this like universal design. But I'm gonna guess that that's not gonna happen.
Yeah, that is frustrating when you have the people who they want to solve the problem, not able to solve the problem. It sounds like
Yeah.
it's exactly what you try to do with your research group and your students, is put the right people in the right places, and you just
Yeah.
need your bosses or the people above you to also have that.
Let me facilitate a meeting. Yeah. And not to say that other people don't have these skills and abilities. And certainly there have been some universities in Canada that have adopted some pretty creative approaches within, again, their sphere of power. And what I think we need to do is broaden our spheres of power to be one big Canadian sphere. So that the solutions that we come up with are as equitable as they can be, that they won't sort of marginalize students who are in community colleges versus those who are in in universities versus those who are you know what I mean, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
if we came up with a global national solution, I feel like it would be more accessible to everyone. And there are realities, right? Higher education is managed at the province level. So that's a sphere you've got to burst. And maybe the fact that, it's an emergency, makes it even more difficult to start, bursting these walls. But I think that what's happened to our education system is evidence of the need to maybe more slowly and cautiously burst these walls down so that we become more resilient in the future.
Yeah. So to quickly go back to a point that I didn't really think of, I always saw this as like a great opportunity to fix a bunch of things and things are going to get better. But you bring up a really good point of having a double cohort coming up.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm assuming that the issue with that is that any sort of accessibility resources that you have would be doubly strained. And
Yeah. And so I don't like making predictions, but if there is an accessibility problem, an equity and accessibility problem in fall 2020, it's going to create a bit of a bottleneck and selection for those students who have more privilege. So unlike the double cohort of 2003, 2004, when they got rid of grade 13 in Ontario, and that was a lesson that we all got through, but the population moving through wasn't selected for based on their privilege. This one might very well do that, and it might force students to take a gap year. And if we're forcing students to taking a gap year, we're selecting based on privilege. So the double cohort may not happen because those students may never return, or if they are able to return after a year, it is going to skew the population towards a population that we really need to support. And there will be a competition for resources that they might not necessarily have had before. Not to say that students from equity-seeking communities aren't in a competitive environment for resources. They are. It will just be exacerbated. And so I worry, and I wonder, are we able to start thinking about that now? I think the answer is no, as far as upper administration of universities go. They're really sort of working in the moment. And there are some universities that have established committees to think about the future. And I definitely, tip my hat to them, and hope that they're going to be able to come up with recommendations for how we can mitigate whatever the possible consequences are.
Right. Okay. So I see what you're saying. The universities that have started to think further in the future, it would be nice if every university could maybe send a delegate, and then you'd create some sort of super group to come up with solutions. That seems reasonable.
Yeah. And of course, meeting these days is impossible, right? But to have some kind of conversation. Unfortunately, the conversation, because of the tradition of higher education being the portfolio of the province, is really happening at the provincial level. And there are interactions that happen at the provincial level across universities. And of course, though, some provinces don't have that many universities or colleges, right? And others have like a lot. So there's a bit of an inequity in distribution there, right? But that's fine. What I do hope, though, is that there is long-term planning and that there is planning at the national level. And I think it's more likely that there's going to be long-term planning and less likely that there's going to be a conversation at the national level.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't want to keep you too long. I think we covered some really interesting stuff and certainly some things worth discussing. I hope people who listen will. Is there a place that we can contact you or?
Yeah. Please, especially graduate students, because first of all, I'm interested in your questions and your ideas about education. If you would like to do research in education for your next level, definitely get in touch. And if you want to share your experience of going through what's happened, it's really important that we understand how all students at all levels have been experiencing this particular event. The event that shall not be named. We haven't named it.
The C word.
The C word, yeah. And in fact, we may be launching a bit of a research project on this exact thing in the future. I'm not collecting data yet because, again, way too soon. Yep. But certainly to spark a conversation. The best way to find me is on Twitter.
Okay.
Just my name is the account, and certainly email or anything. If you want a video chat about what you should do, get in touch and we can set up a meeting.
That's so cool. Well, thank you so much. Actually, yeah, quick little point is just being on Twitter, which I think most academics should do. It's really opened my eyes to things that other people need. Yeah. I personally don't really need too much. I'm in a pretty privileged position, but it's definitely opened my eyes to that kind of thing. And maybe that's a good start for people, just to start to see what needs to be done for other people.
Yep. Exactly.
Any last parting word, any suggestions of like sciencey things that are happening online? Anything that you've been interested in lately? I know Pint of Science is coming up. I don't know if you know that one.
So my official plug, the thing that I am plugging these days is Pint of Science for sure.
Okay.
Super fun. How wonderful that they've been able to transfer some of that, again, community building experience online. I'm just so stoked for it. And I think, being engaged, I think Twitter, obviously I like Twitter. I value it. And I think it's a really good way of keeping in touch with the rest of the community. So yeah, definitely get to tweeting if you haven't, because the best time when you're ready to announce your big thing is not the time to open up a Twitter account.
That makes sense. Cool. Well, thank you so much. This was awesome. This was really informative, and I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of, consolidate some of the ideas into a more accessible narrative. Yeah, I certainly have a lot more things that I want to look into now. Cool. Great. Wonderful. Take care. Yeah, you too. Thank you.